The concept of lost media when it comes to Nintendo feels bizarre. This is arguably the biggest video game company in the world, with many millions of eyes on them constantly. Sure, back in the days before the internet became mainstream, and before Nintendo really grew massive, you could imagine some things slipping through the cracks, but the majority of media in those days was physical, and so it's still possible to find cartridges for these games knocking about. Plus, most of the ROMs for these games have been made available online. Once they're online, there's very little that can be truly done to make them lost again, even if Nintendo tries. And Nintendo themselves are making much of their own catalogue available through the Nintendo Classics line on Nintendo Switch Online. The only time that games become truly lost media is when the distribution method makes it impossible to be backed up, or at least not given what was available to people at the time. Certain arcade games, for example, especially those that have odd control schemes, will not have been preserved. Many Satellaview games too, and some of these have an incredibly low amount of information about them actually available, if any. These examples are usually from very early on though, and you wouldn't see anything after the turn of the century becoming lost media, right? Of course, with games that have to remain online to be able to function, such as Super Mario Bros. 35, my beloved, they can and do become lost media. But today I'm more interested in another set of games that would always have acted as entirely offline games and were made in the era where distributing them in a permanent manner was possible, and yet they were handled in such a way that preservation becomes difficult to the point that some of them are truly lost media, and even more than being unplayable, it is impossible to even watch gameplay of them. These are the Nintendo Game Seminar games. Nintendo actually has a long history of giving game design experience to Japanese students going back to the 90s. There was an event that ran between 1990 and 1992 called Nintendo and Dentsu Game Seminar, which I haven't done a massive amount of research into, but that seems to have been a very similar idea to the Nintendo Game Seminar which started in 2003. In this game seminar, students were given an opportunity to learn about game design from Nintendo themselves and create their own games in groups. Now, the first few years of this let the students develop games on the Game Boy Advance, but we're not so interested in these ones for now, as we know literally nothing about the games created for the seminar in these years. What we are interested in is 2006 onwards, where the games were made for the DS. This might not seem at first to be a fundamentally big difference, until I tell you that we know a lot more about these games than those from the GBA game seminars, because they were released to the public. Last year I went to the Insomnia Game Festival in Birmingham, and I got to play a bunch of games made by University of Birmingham game design students. And while many of them were rough, you can actually see how there is so much talent there. And that's game design from people in Birmingham. Imagine how cool it would be to play games created by students from Japan, and not just that, but students being given guidance from Nintendo. If nothing else, it could be such a cool novelty. Here's the catch though, the actual release of these games was incredibly limited. Over the years, different distribution methods were added on, but in the first few years there was a single method of distribution, this being DS download stations. These download stations were primarily used as a way of being able to distribute demos of games, which I think is pretty awesome, but the Game Seminar games were also given this treatment. There are a few catches to this though. Firstly, DS download stations are obviously the only way to do this, and if there wasn't one nearby, then you're gonna have a hard time getting access to these games. Also, they were only ever downloadable in Japan, so the vast majority of us, and I imagine almost everyone watching my video here, cannot have ever gained access to them. These two things though aren't quite as big a factor as to their scarcity as the distribution period. Sure, some games are only distributed for a limited period of time, such as Super Mario Bros. 35, my beloved, but that at least got the majority of a year. The Game Seminar games, the early ones at least, were distributed for a whopping 2 weeks each. So you had to go to dedicated DS download stations exclusively in Japan within a 2-week period in order to have access to these games. But at least if you actually do all that, then you have them and you get to play them forever. Wrong! Because the games were distributed exclusively over DS download play, so when you turn your DS off, the game is gone forever. As you can imagine, this combination of factors means that these games were always ripe for lost media status. Unless someone had access to the files from the DS download station, there would be no way to dump it, and I doubt anyone was savvy enough in 2005 to do this because lost media wasn't talked about quite as much back then as it is now, with the internet, while not necessarily in its infancy, certainly not being what it is today. So while we actually know what these games were and what they looked like to a certain extent, unlike with the GBA games from the years prior, we can't play them. Am I the only one who thinks that's sad? Even if it's just a novelty, I think it would be awesome to play these games, and yet all we have is reviews and articles about them from the time, and maybe some low quality gameplay footage from them as well. And the craziest thing to me is that no one ever talks about these games. And I know it's impossible for every game franchise Nintendo has to get a lot of talk about it. Nintendo has over 200 franchises if you want to be complete about it, and many of them no one will have ever heard of. But I would have expected someone to try and dive deep enough into the depths of obscure Nintendo to spot this large group of 32 games all under the same umbrella that might be worth talking about. On Reddit, I've seen many images that attempt to show every Nintendo franchise, and these never make the cut, and I would have expected creators like Scott the Was maybe to have stumbled upon it as a topic for a video, but no, nothing from anyone. Heck, the only reason a subreddit exists for the Game Seminar games is because I'm the one who made it, and I'm already obsessed with them, and I'm also the only person that's ever posted on that sub, I believe, so... I first learned about them a few years ago when I had a Twitter account called Every Franchise Is Here. Every day I would make a post on Twitter about a new character that could be added to Smash from every single Nintendo franchise ever. It took me almost a year to complete this, and through it all I became enamoured with all the super obscure stuff I'd never heard of, like Monkey Magic, Gift Pia, Buddy Mission Bond and Bonsai Barber. After all, Nintendo is so massive that you'd expect anything they'd done you would have heard of it if you're dedicated enough a Nintendo fan, yet there's so much stuff they've done that no one ever talks about. And through it all, the words Nintendo Game Seminar rang out, and I wanted so badly to learn more about these games, and to make more people aware that they exist. The issue is that my research skills are lackluster at the best of times, so I'm not very confident at all that I could accurately represent these games. But here I am, many hours of research later, and I feel it's finally time for me to shine a light on these long forgotten gems that need to be remembered somehow, even if they never see the light of day in a more concrete sense ever again. So today I plan to talk about every single one of these games, what I've been able to find out about them, how people reacted to them at the time, and at the end I have a few thoughts about the future of these games. I want to make a disclaimer that, as I said, research isn't really a strength of mine, hence why a lot of my videos are more opinion based, and why there are certain videos of mine that I will always shun, but I've done my best to collect as much accurate information about them as possible, even though almost every source I've found has been badly auto-translated from Japanese, and there's in some cases little to no gameplay footage to speak of. But these games deserve to be looked in a lot deeper than they usually are. So if you want to do your own research and make corrections to me, then please be my guest. Anything that puts these games more on the map than they currently are. I'm going to start from the very beginning with the first game ever distributed from the 2005 Game Seminar, Nekosogi Tornado. Oh, also, please mind my pronunciation. I'm obviously not Japanese, and many of these games have Japanese names that I'm sure to butcher, but again, there's not enough info online to correct me, so I apologise for that. This game was released in 2006, but the actual development was done through the majority of 2005, thus they are 2005 Game Seminar games. I will continue to refer to the Game Seminar games by the year that they started development, not the year they released. Wait, where was I? Oh yeah, Nekosogi Tornado. And talk about starting on a high. I read a lot of reviews for the Game Seminar games over the course of this project, and the one name that kept popping back up was Nekosogi Tornado, because people loved this game. Well, those who got to play it, at least. The game is a vertical shooter in the same kind of style as something like Twin Bee and Xevious, except, as with most Game Seminar games, there's a twist. You don't so much shoot as you do throw. You play as a boy who flies through the air and has to use giant disconnected orange hands to pick up objects from the environment and throw them at enemies that come onto the screen. There are 4 different types of objects. Regular objects which just hit the enemy and bounce off, long objects who can pierce the enemy, boomerang shaped objects which fly in an arc, and exploding objects which explode. There are other ways to attack. When holding an object, you can use the item to physically pound an enemy, which can stun them, or by spinning the object around using the touchscreen, you can create the titular Nekasagi tornado, which picks up multiple objects and can hit more enemies at once, at the trade-off of leaving less objects on the field for you for a while to actually hit your enemies with. There's a combo system attached to the score, which also activates a boosted state, which makes the screen scroll quicker and gives you more points. The game is pretty short, which is typical for Game Seminar games, having 2 levels, each with a boss at the end, plus a playable credits sequence. Despite this short length, the reactions I saw from it were that it was a very fun game, and as I said, I saw the name brought up a lot in the future years, and even later in 2005 when comparing to other Game Seminar games. The next game was Kurakeshi, a very different game, this time being an action puzzle game more in the veins of Tetris or Candy Crush. Now, this one I wasn't able to find much on, just one article talking about it and a video showcasing some gameplay, so I don't entirely understand this one. But you're given a game board with sticks of different colours arranged to make triangles. You can rotate a triangle 120 degrees to move the positions of the sticks, and the goal is to try and get a triangle which has the same colour on all sides. The bit I'm less confident about is the CPU opponent. Their board is shown on the top screen and they're also trying to make triangles. There are stars at the vertices of each triangle, and when you create a triangle of the same colour, it lights a star up. While the game boards are different for you and your opponent, the stars appear to be shared, and so the goal, I would assume, is to have more lit up than your opponent. There are other interesting elements of this game, such as the fact that there is a hidden difficulty mode that you can unlock, or that you play as one of 12 characters, each based on a star sign, and to win the game you have to beat the other 11. I assume the one you play as is based on your own star sign from the date you've set as your birthday in the DS. From what I can tell, the game is addictive and fun, although again I didn't really get this one based on the explanations. On to Bayum now, and the frustrating thing about this is that not only is this unplayable, there's also no existing gameplay footage of this one, not that I could find anyway. It might be the first in this list, but it's not going to be the last that I couldn't find any gameplay footage of. And the worst part is, I don't know if I entirely understand it from the descriptions, but here goes. You essentially have to draw shapes which become creatures that fill out your ecosystem. I don't know how the drawings determine what type of creatures you create, but there is a hierarchy. You have prey, predators, and apex predators, with predators feeding on prey and apex predators feeding on predators, but not prey because they're too far down the ecological pyramid. The creatures are called bios, and they're able to die either by aging or being predated. Your job is to keep this ecosystem in balance so that none of the 3 tiers of the pyramid are eliminated. Again, I'm not sure how you do that exactly. Over time, you'll be able to create more bios to add to the ecosystem, although you can only have 4 different types of bio out at the same time. The game is completed when you hit 20 generations. Bios have their own individual behaviours and characteristics, so there's plenty to play around with, although I believe, while an interesting idea, most people seem to agree that the execution left a lot to be desired. This seemed to be the weakest of the 2005 games. The final game of that year was called Chitafu no Oishii Ihon. This one is probably the simplest and least ambitious of the 2005 games, being a very simple picture book visual novel where you hold the DS in the sideways notebook position. The game has you helping 2 mice called Chi and Fu as they try to collect the ingredients for and then make pancakes, using many features of the DS along the way. While relatively simple, this game is adorable, and I saw a lot of people saying this would have been a delightful little series of games to have, especially as a series for kids, and I have to agree, it does look so cute and cozy. Another fun thing about it is that they actually give you the pancake recipe at the end so you can make the pancakes yourself. The first game distributed in 2006 was Etoyumani Ekakiuta. Now, for the longest time, I could not find anything about this game, and it always really bugged me because all the descriptions were super vague. Then, on research for this video, I found the video you can see now, and I still don't get it. Fortunately, the articles and reviews I found about this game did a decent job trying to explain it, even though I'm still not 100% sure about it. Basically, you take the role of someone trying to make contact with aliens, and to do so, you have to interpret something from the lyrics of a song that you have to draw and then guess what it actually is. It's based on the idea of a painting song, which seems to be a popular thing in Japan, where you use a song as instructions for drawing something, and the prevalence of this in YouTube might be why finding the gameplay of this game was difficult. While it seems that it was weaker than previous entries, it seems it was fairly intuitive, and the people who played it picked up on how it works fairly quickly, even though it doesn't have a tutorial. Then there was Kuru Kuru Tonzuran. I don't have any gameplay footage of this one either, but it doesn't seem like it was too complex. You play as a cat, and there's a massive spike ball that you can spin around by making a spinning motion on the DS touchscreen, kind of like a game such as Pokemon Ranger. It's a vertical shooter style game, like Nekasugi Tornado, but this time you're killing rats. Here's the thing. Apparently this game wasn't very good, and it all comes down to unintuitive controls. The game requires you to be spinning the spike ball at all times in order to move forward, but when you get hit you'll be slowed down, and this can lead to you getting locked in a loop of getting hit quite a lot because you can't get the spike ball back up to speed soon enough, and the spike ball acts as your defense. The game also has an additional attack where you fling the ball forward, but again, as spinning is what keeps you moving forward, doing this can kill your momentum. Your character's movement is also quite slow due to the fact that as you are always spinning the stylus, your character just goes to the centre of the circle, meaning quick movements are difficult, and it's hard to get to the edge of the stage as well. Also, constantly spinning the stylus on the touchscreen just isn't fun as gameplay and can be tiring. Overall, it's kind of a shame because the character had a cute design, and the developers had thought to put a left-handed mode in, which many other game seminar games forgot to do. But in the end, the overall effect is still a game that doesn't seem like it was super fun to play. Ujai no Tagami Chu is another one that I really wish there was some gameplay of because I don't think I entirely get it. There was a single article on this one that I could find, which wasn't really a lot to go off of. This is less a game and more an interactive calendar. When you make an event in the calendar, you'll be asked to make a drawing, and this creates a creature known as a wujai. The type of wujai you get is determined by how you draw the picture. There are around 30 types of wujai, each of which you can apparently talk to, and they have quite a lot of dialogue options. If you haven't spotted the obvious flaw in this piece of software, let me just remind you of the distribution method for this game. The Game Seminar games were distributed over DS Download Play, meaning that once you turn the DS off, the calendar is gone. This renders the software completely useless as there's no real way to use the calendar functionality. In reality, it's definitely meant to be more proof of concept than anything, and when you remember that this is meant to be a student-based work, it starts to make a lot more sense. After all, the distribution element was always just a bonus. The bit that matters is the students having the opportunity to create these games. So while yes, the way the Game Seminar games were distributed does render this software useless, it's still a pretty cool concept, and like many of these, probably could be taken and created into a pretty compelling thing in the modern gaming world if someone felt the desire to make it. Finally, for 2006, we have Hana Otoko to Hana Ona. This game, oh boy, this game. Reading about this was kind of a trip. So it seems to be another visual novel style game, this time focusing on the titular Flower Man and Flower Woman. The game is actually designed to be played by two people, typically a man and a woman, and hopefully, as you will see, a couple. At various points in the game you have to speak into the microphone to do all sorts of stuff, like imitating a mouse for some reason, or answering questions such as what the other person's fetish is. A part of me hopes that this is a bad Google translation of the article I found on the game, and a part of me would find it much funnier if it wasn't. At the end of the game, you're given a compatibility rating with your partner, although I honestly have no idea how this is calculated. Now, the game sounds weird, and the review I saw felt the same, but especially due to the fact that this is a very poorly suited game to the circumstances of its release. You have to go to a DS download station where you are around other people, kids probably included, and you have to start talking into your DS about your partner's fetishes. It'd be a bit embarrassing. The first game of 2009 was Nandemo Mokokoyo-san. You play as a witch called Rakakaraka and a ghost called Bubu, who go around helping people in a small town. You're given an outline of an object and you have to use tools to change its shape by pressing the tools into the shape. For example, pressing the circle tool into the shape will create a circular indent. You can use this to shape the object to whatever the townsfolk need. The shape size can also be changed by speaking into the microphone, and you can colour the shape in, although the effect of this is unclear. A cute detail is that when you close the DS, the game makes a little sound that comes from one of the characters, similar to how many games did a similar thing on the DS. I specifically remember that when you close the DS when playing Scribblenauts, a record scratching sound would play. Anyway, back to this game. While of course short, with only 6 people to help, the game seems like it would be a fun drawing style game, especially for those who aren't as talented at art. Like me. Then we have Wakiri Heya no Suzuki, one of the most unique game seminar games, as this is actually a horror game. Taking a point and click format, you'll tap on things in the environment to either interact with them or pick them up for later use. I didn't understand a lot about this game, although the plot seems to centre around someone who's moved into a new apartment and is experiencing unusual phenomena such as knocking on doors and insect-based stuff. There also seems to be something gameplay related surrounding opening the door to the apartment, but I wasn't able to understand what that was all about. What I did understand was that this game got some pretty heavy love for being completely terrifying. For a DS game, that seems impressive to me. I remember when people were talking about Emio the Smiling Man being the first Nintendo horror game, I was just like, please, Wakiri Heya no Suzuki is right there. The plot and use of puzzles and atmosphere also seem to be praised. While only around 30 minutes in length, the game seems like a really solid time and frankly the kind of thing you could have seen being popped on the eShop at some point. Next is Kiki Master, which is another game about going around solving people's problems. This is another one that is kinda difficult to understand through translated articles alone, but the basic idea is that you have to listen to people talk about their problems and then respond with the right thing and with the right timing, I believe, to increase some sort of tension meter. The tension meter might be a mistranslation, as I'm not sure why increasing tension would be considered a good thing, but that's what I was able to get from it. While short, with only 3 regular stages and a post-game stage, apparently there are many branching paths for the conversations, and that makes it quite interesting. Our last game of this year is Watashi no Oto Chibako. There have been a lot of games so far that involve you having to create weird creatures somehow, and this will not be the last, but each of these is unique, and this one distinguishes itself by requiring you to create the creatures, known as moyakyu, by blowing or speaking into the DS microphone. There isn't much of a goal to the game, with the main point seeming to be to just interact with them. Up to 4 can be created at a time, and there seems to be an emphasis on the sounds the moyakyu make. For example, you can give them a microphone which lets them sing, or you can use a bucket to fill the area with water, changing the sound they make. Speaking of common types of game in the game seminar, for the start of 2008 we have another vertical shooter, although again, this one aims to bring something very different to the table. You have a collection of stars, and you have to find them at enemies. The interesting thing is the method of firing. You use the L and R buttons to point an arrow, and then you fire by blowing into the DS microphone. The speed and distance the star travels is determined by how hard you blow. Enemies can steal the stars if they reach the bottom of the screen, so you have to watch out for that. While fun, the game seems like it was tiring due to the fact that you have to be constantly blowing on the microphone. There's a reason most games use that mechanic sparingly. The next is RE Coetist. This is another one that is more like a virtual toy than a game. You're given a variety of scenarios as if they were scenes in a TV show, and you have to say the next line as if you were a voice actor. There's not really much to say about this one. A cool idea, something I think would be cool to be expanded upon, but it doesn't exactly have gameplay in the traditional sense, and it's one of the games that would be really difficult for me to comment on, seeing as the entire thing is in Japanese. While I'm on the subject, as much as I'd love to play these games, it is true that many of them do rely on the Japanese language way too much to be accessible to a monolingual English speaker. That certainly doesn't go for every game, but this is one that just wouldn't work without modifications. Ugugo Trinity is an interesting one. Instead of building a game around a singular concept, Ugugo Trinity has 3 separate minigames to play. They are, however, all still based around the same concept, getting you moving. That's an interesting thing to see in a DS game, as you would expect it more on a Wii game, but I guess that's why it was made this way, to give a new take on what a DS game can be. The first of these games has you trying to kill flies by clapping your hands. As in, there's a cursor on the screen, and when it's aiming at a fly, you physically clap your hands in front of the DS microphone. Kill 5 flies, and you win. The second game shows you a pose, which you're meant to copy, and then describes how you should move your body in order to get into a new position. You then have to select the correct finishing position from the ones provided. You could do this without moving around, of course, but you'd have to visualize the changes with your mind's eye, and actually doing the pose seems simpler. The final game has you cooking yakitori on a grill by fanning your hands in front of the DS mic so that you can fan the flames just the right amount. The game's mic sensitivity is fine-tuned to make it difficult to do this game by blowing on it, meaning you have to play the game the intended way. I think the way this game tries to get you moving is really novel, even if the concept of moving around while playing games is better suited to consoles like the Wii. The final game of 2008 is Chaosapiens, another game about creating weird creatures called Chaosapi, and just kind of playing around with them. This time though, it's a human-ish head, with you choosing things like facial features, head shape and hairstyle. You can play with them, take pictures with them, and they even talk with a Tomodachi-esque mechanical voice. But the cool thing about this is that they actually added the ability to share the Chaosapi with other people. I believe this is the only game seminar game to actually feature wireless communication, although that's mainly because, well, what's the point when people are gonna lose the Chaosapi as soon as they turn their DS off anyway? Still, it's cool that this functionality was added. On to 2009, and this marks a pretty significant event. As I've said, the games were previously distributed exclusively at DS download stations, but 2009 saw the advent of a new distribution method, the Everybody's Nintendo channel, just called the Nintendo channel in the West. This channel mostly acted as a way to share information with Wii users through videos, as well as tracking their data to create tailored game recommendations. However, it also had the ability to distribute demos for games, and among these, it seems that the Game Seminar games were also distributed this way. Of course, the games were still Japan exclusive and still had a limited distribution period, but the one effect this did have was that it meant that people had the ability to access and dump these ROMs. And that's exactly what they did. I actually spent a long time looking for ROMs of these games that were playable, not knowing most of the context as to why they were not. But finally, sometime in 2023, I got a tip about them possibly being available, and after a bit of searching, I found them. And oh, the moment that I booted the first one up, I actually had a tear in my eye. I've spoken before about the fact that I don't typically use emulation, but these are one of the few exceptions for me because it doesn't matter what I do. There would be no way of playing these games. They are completely impossible to play on original hardware. The game that I first started up when I found these ROMs just happened to be the first one distributed under this new system, Draw Penner. Now that we are talking about games I myself have played, I can go into a lot more detail about my own personal thoughts, for the most part at least. Also, all the gameplay footage you will see is mine, played on emulator of course. Draw Penner is another vertical shooter of a sort, but again it does distinguish itself in a pretty ingenious way. You play as a little green blob called Penner, and to hurt your enemies you have to draw lines on the touchscreen. Now what makes this unique is that your lines don't have to be straight, but you have to be careful about being too funky with the shape. The shape of your projectile also determines the path it takes. If you draw a line shaped like a heart, the projectile won't just be in the shape of a heart, it will move as if it's following the path you drew, just at an enlarged scale. This is super unique and quite fun honestly, but it could also be frustrating. For one thing, while the path the projectile takes is the same as the shape you've drawn, it's also mirrored, which can actually make it really hard to aim properly. I honestly struggled at many points, although fortunately there is rarely any real pressure to do things quickly. Unfortunately, every time I've played Draw Penner, I've gotten myself stuck on this one jellyfish boss because she has these tentacles that reach towards you, and if they touch you, you lose health. You can only take 3 hits, but the issue is that you have to guide the projectiles through the super tight space between her tentacles without touching them, also having to deal with bubble streams that send the projectile sideways way faster than it should, and at an angle as well. This feels almost impossible, but I did actually manage to get past this part. Only for you have to do a very similar thing, except with a sea urchin getting in the way. It feels like I meant to make my projectile move in ways that counteract things like the angle and the bubble stream, but doing this without making it too big to actually fit within the gaps of the tentacles feels next to impossible. In the end, I've had to give up on this game, which is frustrating because it's a really clever, interesting and fun game. It just doesn't feel like its unwieldy control scheme has been taken into account as much as it should have been in the level design. The next game is one I did play, but is hard to properly appreciate. This is Dumo DS Desu. The setup for this game is that the DS has been given some form of sentience and is being allowed to play with you and get to know you, but only for 3 days. Of course, the gameplay loop is not actually 3 days, closer to 30 minutes, maybe an hour, depending on how you play it. But in-game, after you've done a few activities, you do end up getting moved on to the next day, so that's just the narrative framing. There's a few different minigames you can do, such as painting with the DS and an activity where you massage the buttons of the DS, which is interesting. Then there's the noughts and crosses game, although the DS will sometimes cheat in order to beat you. All of this is meant to build the relationship between you and the DS, with all the activities being made to feel collaborative in some way, whether it be working on a painting together, playing a competitive game together, or giving your DS a massage. I still don't get that bit. The reason it's impossible for me to truly appreciate it is because the game is very text heavy, and again, I don't speak Japanese. The DS is clearly given a lot of personality, and you can see that just from the facial expressions and the tone of voice. But beyond that, I just can't feel like I have a bond with the DS because none of what it's saying makes sense to me. And this is the greatest shame because from what I've heard, this game is surprisingly emotional. After the DS has spent 3 days with you, they must leave and their data is wiped from your console. From my research, a lot of people were brought to tears by this game, so I would imagine the way the game builds the character of the DS makes it genuinely sad when they leave. This may well be the game most suited to the Game Seminar distribution format, as it plays on the idea that once the DS entity is gone, it really is gone, and that's true of the game itself too. This seems like such a clever little title, and honestly, one of the ones that is the biggest shame was never made more widely available and localised. Not that it ever would have been, but I would love to play a short, sweet, story-based game like this. Next is Ototo, and this one is a very lovable rhythm-based game. I like rhythm games already, and I wouldn't say this is one of the greatest, but I like the idea. In a very Friday Night Funkin' style, you have to copy a rhythm played by an opposing sea creature. You can tap, hold, or swipe to get different musical effects. I believe the pitch is also based on where you tap on the touchscreen, although I didn't realise this so I never did it. You get points here for how accurate you are. The really interesting part though is that this is only half of each level. After that section is done, the roles are reversed and you have to create a melody yourself for the opponent to copy. You obviously get points for being more accurate on the beats, but there are also certain stock rhythms that you get extra points for. This is a nice reversal of what you'd expect from a rhythm game, although I do feel maybe a little more development of the idea would go a long way, and of course, the short length hurts the game. It only has 4 stages, plus a post-game stage where you play against an evil version of yourself. But you can't hold short length against a game like this because it's a student-made piece of work that was given a very short amount of development time and was released on DS Download Play. It has catchy music, a nice visual style, and a great gimmick that I think is worth checking out. The final 2009 game is Tentsunagi. This was quite difficult to research as its name is the same as that of dot-to-dot puzzles in Japan, and there's a good reason for that. In this game, you have to draw a line that connects blobby creatures called tenkun and guide them to the end. It seems pretty simple, but you have to try and get them to the goal in a certain colour order, and while this starts out easy, a lot of mechanics are piled on pretty quickly. You can draw a circle around 2 small tenkun to make a big one, and the colour of this big one will be based on the colour of the 2 smaller ones. 2 red ones will make a larger red one, but a red and a yellow tenkun will make an orange tenkun. They can also be split apart to create smaller tenkun as needs be, or to split the colours apart, and there ends up being some relatively complex solutions. I think the greatest criticism I have of this is the fact that the different colours have different behaviours. For example, red ones move a lot faster than others, while orange ones are drawn towards the line and can sometimes attach themselves to it before their turn. But these aren't truly the issue, and different behaviours could be a fun concept, were it not for the purple ones. These things will run away from the line the first time you try to connect them, meaning you have to be quick to get them on there again before they stop running. And the big issue is that they are so fast and slippery that it can be a real pain to get them on the line. I didn't finish this game due to one level being a bit too hard, but I did enjoy it, and I think it would be excellent if the difficulty scaling was a bit more balanced and the purple ones weren't as awkward as they were. 2010 was the last year we got Game Seminar games on the DS, and I have to say that I think it was a pretty strong year. They were also distributed via Nintendo Zone this year, which I think was just an expansion of what DS download stations were, but that doesn't really affect much for the purposes of this video. Starting out, we have Planetaria, a game where you play as a comet and have to make sure you orbit around planets to give them your energy. I'm not sure what's happening here. I really enjoyed this one. You control it by tapping on the touchscreen and your comet will move towards that direction. You have to try and collect stars and avoid hitting the red space rocks, which will cause you damage. There's not really much else to it, but this is one where I feel like the short length is a real shame, as it feels like there's plenty of room to expand upon it. I also really enjoyed the soundtrack. The soundtrack for a lot of these games is great, but I loved the vibe this one had. It was kinda unexpected. There was another space-themed game next in the Tente show. This one is really unique. You control both a black hole and a white hole, with the former being on the touchscreen and the latter on the top screen. However, when you move the black hole on the touchscreen, the white hole moves in the opposite direction. This movement is surprisingly intuitive and quite fun to use. The two holes are orbiting around a planet that is being bombarded with meteorites, and you have to use them to destroy the meteorites. The black hole can take meteorites in, which are then stored in the white hole. The white hole then has the option to either fire the meteorites at others that are oncoming, or hold them and use them to batter the other meteorites. The meteorites stored in the white hole are compounded to make larger meteorites, and this will decrease every time you bash a meteor while holding it. But if you fire a meteor, it won't get smaller no matter how many it hits. This game felt like it could be fun, although it felt like it was too predictable in how it threw the meteors at you. The only real reason I had issues with it though was because it was emulated. You can swap the positions of the black and white holes by flicking the touchscreen to swap their positions, but I found this really hard to do using a mouse, so I feel like maybe it would have been better if it was played on original hardware. Otherwise though, pretty cool concept. On to Pulpy. I've mentioned this game before in my 24 Media Challenge video because while Draw Penna was the first game seminar game I played, Pulpy was the first one I played to completion, and in fact, on my first time playing it, I actually 100%ed it. I really love this game, it's so much fun. The gameplay takes place on floating circles in the sky. Pulpy can stand on these from any angle, kinda like Mario can in the Galaxy games, but in 2D. You can drag him across the screen to go around the planet and stretch him so that he can reach other planets. You have to reach the end of each of the 7 main levels, plus the much harder post-game level. The levels have plenty of obstacles, plus stars for you to collect. There are also slingshots for you to use to reach further stars or planets, and health you can pick up if you get hurt. My one criticism is that sometimes the controls can be a bit unwieldy. As Pulpy is always the centre of the screen, it's really easy for you to start moving him in one direction, but accidentally letting him go shooting in that direction fast enough to send you into an enemy. But I managed to get used to it, and with a cute art style, great music, and an overall really fun game, this is surely one of the best Game Seminar games. The final DS game released from the Game Seminar was Flowood. Yes, that is how it's spelled, so that is how I will pronounce it. In Flowood, you have to guide a group of jellyfish to the goal. The trick is that you don't directly control them, instead creating water streams that will send you in the direction you choose. This seems easy at first, but it gets very hard later on, especially if you try to collect all the jellyfish eggs and try to get them all to the end with all the hazards trying to stop you. The difficulty gets kinda brutal at times, but it's well done and enjoyable. There's also a fair bit of content here with 12 stages. I will say that the controls feel like they don't always work perfectly, and I'm sometimes not really sure why my streams aren't working properly, but that could just be a me thing. After these games were distributed in 2011, there was a break in the Game Seminar. I don't know if an official reason was given for this, but my guess would be that 2011 was the release year of the 3DS, and so maybe they wanted all hands on deck for that. But the seminar returned in 2013, the key difference being that the games were on the Wii U now, rather than the DS. The 2013 games were actually bundled together in a single piece of software called Nintendo Game Seminar 2013 Student Works. Unfortunately, I haven't actually been able to play any of the Wii U games. I thought I'd found some ROMs at some point, but they didn't actually work. Plus, I don't think my PC would be able to handle emulating Wii U games. It would be difficult to play them anyway, as most of them require a lot of motion controls and weird layouts with the gamepad. Either way, considering these games were distributed over the eShop, these certainly aren't lost media, as many people will still have them on their Wii U's. if they had them in the first place. I obviously did not. I do believe, however, that these were distributed on a permanent basis, as in they were not distributed for a limited time as the DS games were. The first game I'll cover for this is Popo Hunter. This one really demonstrates how crazy some of these games ended up being. The premise of the game is that you're trying to find a pigeon to be the bride of a rather more unpopular and apparently unattractive pigeon called Popota. You do this in much the way you would expect, throwing bread to lure the pigeon towards you. The game is played using either two Wii remotes or a Wii remote and a nunchuck combination, with the Wii U gamepad being placed on the floor. To throw the bread, you'll make a throwing action with the Wii remote, and once the pigeon gets close enough, it will appear on the gamepad screen at your feet. At this point, you have to make a catching motion by reaching down with the Wii remotes. Each pigeon is given a ranking based on the rarity of the type of pigeon, as well as the speed and ease you employed to catching it. There are also elements that make your catch harder, such as sparrows that eat the food you throw out, or a dog that can scare the pigeons away. All of this leads to a surprising amount of depth. There are 3 stages plus a free mode, and despite the reliance on a weird setup and motion controls, it's a game with a great style and interesting gameplay that people seem to enjoy. Next is the first truly multiplayer game from the game seminar, Kanarasu 2 Center Heroes. This is a top-down game where you see a camera frame and have to stay within it when the camera itself goes off. The closer to the center you are, the better and the more points you get, but you're also able to use a dash attack to knock other players out of the frame, which is where the party game aspect comes in. You can play with up to 5 players, 4 on Wii remotes and 1 on the gamepad, or fill in the remaining spots with CPU players, and there are 2 different modes. A timed mode and a knockout mode, where the player with the lowest points is knocked out every few rounds. From everything I've seen said about the game, people really enjoyed this as a multiplayer game, many comparing it to Bomb Man, and I have to say, I see the similarity. Next is Shima Nagame. This is a short but quite sweet little game. You are taking a more godlike role, looking down on a small island where a cloud fairy called Kurodo-kun resides. You are able to use 3 items when helping him navigate the island. An apple, which he'll go towards so he can eat it, a stick he can use to reach or hit higher things, and a banana peel he'll slip on. Using these items, you have to help him explore the island and collect 10 stars that are scattered around. While the location of the stars is shown on the TV screen, which shows a zoomed out view compared to the gamepad, these aren't out in the open and you'll have to create certain interactions to cause them to emerge. The island is also covered in clouds and you dispel the cloud by letting Kurodo-kun walk through them. The gameplay is apparently very simple, but the game is adorable and honestly, this is one I would have loved to play. The final game to cover for 2013 is Sentu Danchi. This one seems like it was incredibly popular and is one of the game seminar games with the most footage of it on YouTube. This is because the game has a fair amount of depth to it, as well as difficulty options. It's a tower defense style game, except instead of showing you a top-down view from which you can place towers, you have to build up your base using resources collected from your workers, and then place workers in the base at certain points to help them fend off against enemies. There's a day-night cycle, with the daytime being where you collect resources and build up your base, and the nighttime being when the enemies attack and you have to defend against them. The goal is to defend the rocket that's on your base, and if this is attacked by the enemies, then it's game over. The game seems to have garnered a lot of praise for its depth and challenge and being overall very well made. This seems to be one of the highlights of the Wii U era of the game seminar and certainly the most well liked of 2013. And then we come to the final year of Nintendo Game Seminar, 2014. These games were distributed separately, not in one collection like 2013, but they were still available on the eShop until its closure. The first game I'll go through is Michiko Jump. In this game, you play as a young girl who is playing on the seesaw with her dad, but he is so heavy that he launches her into the air. From a top-down perspective, you have to guide Michiko upwards by bouncing off of clouds, with there being many different types of clouds with different effects. The climb is split into sections, and falling to the bottom of one of these is game over. There are also 555 stars that you can collect on your way up. The game seems like it was quite an enjoyable game and had a really nice atmosphere, with especially some gorgeous images created for the cutscenes, but I did read some criticism stating that it would have been much better suited to the 3DS and its stereoscopic 3D. Next is one I have always had a great infatuation with, Arrow Crash. When I first saw this one, I loved the visual style, and I thought the dinosaur skeleton character, who I believe is called Alb, but I only find that on one source mentioning that offhand, is adorable. The game itself though seems like it may be a bit harder to get into. In it, you control each of the legs using the joysticks individually, with the gamepad being used to balance Albert by tilting forwards or backwards. There were some comparisons made to Quap, being a physics-based game that is just asking you to learn how to make your character walk, and from what I've heard, the controls are a bit unintuitive, but not impossible to get used to. With that said, I think this game's visual style is its key strength, and I will always be obsessed with it for that reason. Also, despite the unwieldy controls, I did find one guy that speedruns this game, or at least has done pretty recently, so yeah, this game kinda has a speedrunning scene. Our penultimate game is Jikansa Tansa. It took me a while to understand what was happening here, but basically, you play as a penguin robot called Penta, and you have to guide her to a clam, where she will place a number of pearls that you pick up along the stage. Sounds simple, right? Now, here's where it gets more complicated. You don't just get to move Penta freely. Penta, it seems, has done this path before and has a memory of it, but you can only view the very beginning to see which direction she starts going in. After that, a piece of music plays and her antenna will start pointing in different directions, and you need to use the rhythm created from this in order to replicate the movement and guide her through to all the pearls and to the gold. After you've input the movement, she will start to move and you'll see how accurate you are. You may not get the exact path correct first time, but you have some leeway in the form of fish, which I would assume are meant to represent fuel, and you can try to collect up the remaining pearls and reach the goal using more of the fish, although this will affect your rank. This game seems like an incredibly unique take on a rhythm game, and also bears some similarities to that Yoshi game in Nintendo Land that probably no one remembers. From what I can tell, a lot of people really like this one. And then finally, we reach the last game on our list, Doki Doki Tagami Relay. What a lot of people don't know is that this was actually the only one released in the West, but much of it was changed and it was renamed to Super Mario Bros. Doki Doki Tagami Relay takes place within various classrooms where you play as students trying to pass notes around the class. Obviously, the teacher doesn't like this, so you have to do so discreetly, making sure to never do it when they might see. The primary way to pass them is using the Wii U gamepad and physically making a motion to the side or behind you as if you were passing the note. There are, however, other ways of passing it, such as making it into a paper aeroplane and throwing it towards another student. Obviously, if the teacher sees the note, you'll lose a life, and losing all three causes the game over. The game features different levels with different class layouts and different teachers who all have different behaviours, so you'll have to adapt on the fly in each level. This seemed to be one of the more popular games this year, and was praised for being a lot of fun as well as making good use of the gamepad. And that's it. That's all the Game Seminar games. Nintendo never held another game seminar after 2014. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was the failure of the Wii U, maybe they had a lot to prepare for the Switch, but regardless of why they stopped, they never went back. Could they do this again? Maybe. It's been over a decade now, so I wouldn't say I consider it to be likely, but I think it would be excellent if they did. The Switch 2 has so many cool features such as mouse mode that could lead to some really interesting possibilities for students who want to get into game design. I do feel, however, that there is a fairly big reason that Nintendo hasn't done this. Indie games have really hit their stride, and as a result, who needs to be a part of a program like the Game Seminar? That's not to say that no one would benefit from it, but I certainly think that the Game Seminar games give a real indie game vibe. Had these people been starting out their game development journey now as opposed to mid-2000s to mid-2010s, I feel like most of them would have just made indie games that could have had moderate success. So in a way, I feel like the Game Seminar has less point than it used to. And yet I feel like it would still be a great thing to do. Maybe I just want something that will once again shine a light on the Game Seminar in general, but I would love to see what kinds of games the students of today could create using the Nintendo Switch 2 hardware and the guidance of Nintendo. And I think it's also cool to see where these people end up, because they don't just do the Game Seminar and then stop. You have people who have gone into their own indie development, or even people who ended up working at Nintendo itself. The Game Seminar has had an effect on Nintendo game development, let's have no bones about it. I hope I was able to convey why I'm so passionate about these games. These appear to be some of the most creative and interesting games under Nintendo's wings, with excellent art direction and music, as well as some really unique gameplay that I can personally attest to being, if sometimes imperfect, pretty well executed. I think these are games that deserve so much more focus than they get. After all, they are the antithesis of what is poisoning the game industry these days. Most games are designed to be bigger and more eye-catching, while ultimately being very shallow because companies want to make the most money possible. These games, meanwhile, were made by presumably bright-eyed students who are driven by sheer passion for what they do. Games that are explicitly not made for profit and yet were still made, and you can just see how much care is put into them, how excited the students must have been to create them. Sure, a lot of them are a bit gimmicky, but that just makes each and every one stand out. Nekasagi Tornado, for example, clearly stood out to people not just because it was fun, but also because it was a fresh take on something they'd seen before. Just look at all the different vertical shooter style games here and think, have you played a vertical shooter quite like any of them? The answer is probably no. That's what the game seminar was, a way to breed creativity in people just starting out their game design journey. And more than just being remembered, I think these games should be played by people. I think we should get the chance to experience them, regardless of quality, although most of them appeared to be pretty good anyway. And so we come to the part of the video where I have to inevitably talk about it. The fact that these games are impossible to play, at least most of them are. I have talked about this in my video about the preservation of Animal Crossing Pocket Camp, but preserving games is so important, and it's important on Nintendo's end too. There are games such as the Satellaview games, their arcade games, and Super Mario Bros. 35, my beloved, which should be preserved, and yet it's not possible for us, the general public, to do this, even if we wanted to. The Game Seminar games fall under that. We, at least it appears, cannot do anything to preserve these games. I initially thought there was hope, as I'm aware that many DS download stations distributed things using a type of DS cartridge. You can find some of these online, and if we could get access to the ones that house the Game Seminar games, then dumping the ROM becomes a possibility. Except in Japan, from what I can tell, DS download stations didn't use a cartridge, instead doing it using a server system. The last hope dashed. These games are truly lost media for now. If they're going to be brought back to the public, it has to be through Nintendo themselves. This, to me, seems possible. Again, I went into greater depth about this in my Pocket Camp video, but Nintendo themselves have made a lot of steps to preservation of games on their earlier consoles. Practically the entire NES catalogue and most of the SNES catalogue of first-party games is available on NSI through Nintendo Classics, with rumours circulating that the service is being updated to have mouse controls, and thus potentially games such as the Light Gun games could become possible to preserve too. We've already seen them adding pretty obscure releases and even multiple versions of the same game, and with the addition of GameCube to the Switch Online service, it seems only a matter of time before we get DS games on Switch Online, and when that happens, well, the Game Seminar games will be possible. Not certain, but that will be the day that I will truly believe it can and will happen. And I think it would be a nice thing to do, especially as some of the reviews of these games I read were practically begging to make it a permanent downloadable experience, even sometimes saying they would pay money for it, or at least if the games were further developed and expanded upon. But until then, I think the best thing that we can do, and frankly the best thing that could come from this video, is that we remember them. These games are lost, and I'll be damned if I let them become forgotten. No one seems to care about these games, and frankly not many people, especially in the West, seem to even realise they exist. And while maybe no one will ever care more than me, I hope I can inspire others to look more into these games, to play the ones that are available, to spread the good word of Pulpy. We need to talk about these games, and heck, not just these games. I mentioned a few games at the head of this video that I will guarantee 99% of people won't have heard of. Monkey Magic, an obscure Nintendo arcade game and not one of the ones that most people think of when talking about Nintendo's arcade ventures. Giftpia, a Japan-exclusive GameCube game that I have never heard anyone else talk about. Bonsai Barber, a WiiWare-exclusive game about giving vegetables haircuts. Buddy Mission Bond, a Japan-exclusive Switch game that no one this side of the world seems to know anything about. Now, obviously, Buddy Mission Bond is not and will never be lost media. There's just no reason to care about it over here because it's text heavy and most of us can't speak Japanese. But still, this is a Nintendo game on the Switch that basically no one talks about. I hope that people will take a deeper look at not just the Game Seminar games, but also other obscure Nintendo games. There is so much to dive into here, and I think if people search far enough, they'll find a gem that they never would have before. Because at the end of the day, no matter how little it was marketed, no matter how short, or who it was made by, every game deserves to be remembered. Thank you for watching.
Hi, it's Slade here, obviously. Just wanted to, have a little bit at the end just to talk unscripted. Obviously, this is a video that I've been working on for quite a while. I've wanted to work on it for even longer. So I did kind of want to lead with just saying, if you enjoyed this, please, I would really appreciate likes, subscriptions. It's been a really big thing for me, and if I'm honest, just seeing more talk about this topic specifically would be, mean the world, but I wouldn't say no to likes and subscriptions. And obviously, I've already said if people, want to correct me on anything, please do so in the comments. There's some things I left out of this video because of the fact that I wasn't sure about the sources. There was maybe some mixed messaging about what the actual facts were. For example, I did read somewhere that the current lead on music for Mario Kart, so both Mario Kart 8 and Mario Kart World, may actually have started out on a Game Seminar game, but there was a bit of confusion. I couldn't really tell which game it was or if it was actually true, so I left that out. But I did want to mention there's still so much more to explore about this topic, and I'd love to see more people talking about it. I also just wanted to say I am going to be linking all of the resources I've used. I'm going to put a document that has everything I've used here, all of the videos that I have kind of looked at, all of the articles that I read. Again, they're all in Japanese, but I'm linking those in the description, just so that, again, more people can do more research on this, and, hopefully we can make a big enough buzz and, get more people to know about this. That's my overall dream. So, hopefully, let's see. But thank you. Honestly, if you've got this far, this has been a real passion project for me, so thank you so much. And as I said, hopefully I will see you in the next one.